April 2, 1972. The northern provinces of South Vietnam were collapsing under the weight of the North's Easter offensive. Armor columns poured south across the demilitarized zone, supported by artillery unseen since the height of the war. In their path lay the Dong Ha Bridge, a vital crossing over the Qua Viet River. If it fell intact, North Vietnamese tanks would have an open highway to Hue and Da Nang. In the chaos, a single order cut through the confusion: hold the bridge at all costs. Just 27 Americans remained on site, mostly Marine Corps advisors attached to the South Vietnamese 3rd Division. They were engineers, radio operators, and staff sergeants, not an assault company. The nearest reinforcements were miles away, their own routes blocked or collapsing. Yet they knew what that bridge meant. It wasn't just concrete and steel. It was the final obstacle between the North Vietnamese army and the Deep South. Major John Ripley, a tall, soft-spoken Marine with combat experience from earlier tours, took command of the defense. His mission: prevent enemy armor from crossing. His means: whatever explosives and courage they could carry. As dawn broke over Dong Ha, the first tremors of artillery began. Shells churned the riverbank and ripped through the bridge approaches. South Vietnamese trucks fled south, some catching fire as they tried to escape. Amid the chaos, Ripley's men stayed. They crawled under the bridge's steel girders, rigging demolition charges by hand, each blast cap set with deliberate precision. The enemy's lead tanks appeared on the far bank, Soviet-made T-54s, black smoke trailing behind. Ripley watched them through binoculars, calm but calculating. The situation was impossible, but Marines were taught never to surrender a bridge. Not in Korea, not in France, and certainly not here. By midday, the order became prophecy. They would hold 27 men against a battalion, as long as the bridge stood. The first shots cracked across the Qua Viet just after midday. Small arms fire stitched the river surface as the North Vietnamese infantry advanced behind the cover of their tanks. The defenders had no illusion about the odds. Reports placed nearly a battalion-sized force approaching Dong Ha, supported by armor and artillery. 27 Americans and a handful of South Vietnamese soldiers braced for impact. Major Ripley's immediate focus was not the fight, but the bridge. He and Corporal Des Grimes crawled beneath the steel frame again, working in the choking dust and shrapnel. Every blast cap, every charge had to be placed perfectly. Any misfire could leave the bridge intact for the enemy to cross. The girders vibrated with every shell impact, shaking loose flakes of rust that rained down into the river below on the near bank. Marines manned machine guns and recoilless rifles, firing in short bursts to conserve ammunition. A river crossing under fire is among the most desperate forms of combat. No cover, no retreat, and no reinforcements. Radio contact with division headquarters was erratic. Air support, delayed by weather and the sheer scale of the offensive, could not reach them in time. As T-54s began to nose toward the bridge, the Marines' first anti-tank rocket streaked out and detonated short. The shock wave rolled across the water, but the tank kept coming. Ripley shouted for calm, ordering another shot. The second round hit the lead vehicle's track, halting it just shy of the bridge ramp. Smoke poured out as its crew bailed into the river, disappearing beneath the current. It was a small victory, but temporary. Behind that burning wreck, more tanks were lining up, and their main guns began to range in on the American position. Each blast sent shards of metal and concrete slicing through the air. The defenders ducked low, ears ringing, clutching their rifles in the trembling silence between impacts. When dusk fell, the bridge still stood, but the ground shook beneath their boots. They had bought hours, nothing more, and Ripley knew those hours were all he needed to finish the job. Night came with the smell of smoke and oil drifting over the Qua Viet. The sky glowed faint red from artillery fire to the north. The Americans crouched in shallow foxholes along the approach road, rifles laid across their knees, waiting for the next barrage. Between the explosions, the bridge moaned like something alive. Steel expanding, cables humming under strain. Major John Ripley knew the clock had run out. The North Vietnamese tanks were regrouping. If the bridge remained intact, the enemy would pour across before dawn. Crawling under the structure with only a flashlight and his demolition kit, he moved hand over hand along the beams. The space beneath was tight, the girders slick with oil and river mist. Shrapnel hissed into the water around him. Each movement was deliberate. Wedge the charge, wire the fuse, double-check the connection. He had to rig over 500 pounds of explosives across the bridge's critical support beams. There was no safety line, no backup team. Grimes, holding a flashlight above the waterline, handed him the next satchel, his knuckles white. The Marines above them kept firing in measured bursts, their tracers carving thin orange lines across the night. When the charges were finally placed, Ripley crawled back along the beam, lungs burning, uniform shredded from the steel edges. Reaching the embankment, he keyed the detonator circuit himself. Nothing happened. The fuse had jammed. Without hesitation, he slid back under the bridge, cleared the blockage, and tried again. This time, a sharp flash split the darkness. Then a sound like thunder tearing through metal. The entire span lifted and folded in on itself, falling into the Qua Viet with a roar that rolled for miles. Flames lit the river's surface. On the far bank, advancing tanks ground to a halt. The Dong Ha Bridge was gone, destroyed completely. 27 Americans had done what an entire division could not. They stopped a battalion cold. When dawn broke on April 3, 1972, the bridge at Dong Ha no longer existed. In its place lay a twisted mass of smoking steel, half submerged in the brown river current. Across the northern bank, North Vietnamese tanks sat motionless, unable to advance. The only crossing between Quang Tri and the south had been erased. For the defenders, the silence that followed was almost disorienting. The Marines and South Vietnamese engineers emerged from the rubble, faces blackened, uniforms torn. They had held for 36 straight hours, outgunned and isolated. Many had not slept since the offensive began. Some could barely hear after the detonations. Yet every one of them understood the magnitude of what they had done. The bridge was gone, and so was the enemy's path to the south. Within hours, the North Vietnamese redirected their advance eastward, searching for another crossing. The pause they caused gave Allied forces precious time to regroup and organize a defense around Hue. The small stand at Dong Ha, fought by fewer than 30 Americans and a handful of ARVN soldiers, had altered the tempo of the entire northern campaign. Major John Ripley was later decorated with the Navy Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. But he often dismissed the personal recognition, insisting that no one man destroyed that bridge. For him, it was the discipline, courage, and cooperation of every Marine, engineer, and Vietnamese ally that made the demolition possible. The site of the Dong Ha Bridge remains a quiet stretch of river today. Few traces of the battle survive, save for scattered metal fragments and memorial plaques. Yet the story endures in military academies, in Marine Corps lore, and in the words Ripley himself once used to explain the mission. We were not fighting for the bridge. We were fighting for time. That time, bought at such staggering risk, became the difference between retreat and survival. 27 men, ordered to hold, stood their ground, and in doing so they stopped a battalion in its tracks.